The unwelcome guest. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, HOA, had always been a force to be reckoned with. With her perfectly coiffed hair, clipboard perpetually in hand, and an unshakable belief that she knew what was best for everyone, she thrived on micromanaging the lives of her neighbors. But this time her overreach had crossed a line. Without so much as a courtesy knock on the door, Karen had taken it upon herself to invite 100 people to camp on my sprawling, secluded property, a decision that left me fuming and scrambling for solutions. My land, nestled deep in the woods and surrounded by towering trees, was my sanctuary, a place I cherished for its peace and privacy. That peace was now shattered by the prospect of strangers trampling through my carefully maintained trails, setting up tents near my creek, and disturbing the natural harmony I had worked so hard to preserve. As if the audacity of her actions wasn't enough, Karen had the nerve to justify her decision by claiming it was for the community. But little did she know, I had a secret weapon waiting in the wings. A pack of highly trained guard dogs whose presence would make even the boldest intruder think twice about overstaying their welcome. A sanctuary under threat. The idea of 100 strangers descending upon my land felt like an invasion straight out of a nightmare. My property, which spanned several acres of dense woodland and rolling hills, had always been a refuge. Not just for me, but for the wildlife that called it home. Deer grazed undisturbed in the meadows, foxes darted through the underbrush, and birds filled the air with their songs. Every inch of this land carried memories. The tree where I'd carved my initials as a child, the rocky outcrop where I'd spent countless evenings watching the sunset, the creek where I'd learned to skip stones. It was more than just property. It was a living, breathing part of me. Karen's plan threatened to unravel everything I held dear. The thought of tents pitched haphazardly across my fields, bonfires crackling where wildflowers grew, and the constant hum of human activity made my stomach churn. I could already picture the litter left behind, the broken branches from makeshift shelters, and the inevitable damage to the fragile ecosystem I'd nurtured for years. What infuriated me most was the sheer entitlement behind her actions. She hadn't asked permission, consulted me, or even considered how her grand gesture might impact me. To her, my land was nothing more than a blank canvas for her latest scheme, a resource to exploit for her own gain. As I paced the edge of my property line, staring at the horizon where the sun dipped below the trees, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. This wasn't just about inconvenience. It was about losing control of something that defined who I was. My land was my anchor, my escape, my legacy. If Karen got her way, all of that would be gone, replaced by chaos and disregard. And yet, despite the anger bubbling inside me, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of dark satisfaction. She had no idea what she was walking into. Because Karen had overlooked one crucial detail. My guard dogs. Guardians of the land. My pack of guard dogs wasn't just a collection of pets. They were a finely tuned team, bred and trained for protection. There were 6 of them in total, each chosen not only for their loyalty and intelligence but also for their imposing presence. At the head of the pack was Titan, a massive German shepherd with piercing amber eyes and a bark that could stop intruders in their tracks. Next came Luna, a sleek Belgian Malinois known for her lightning-fast reflexes and uncanny ability to read human emotions. Shadow, a jet-black Doberman, moved with the grace of a predator. His every step calculated and deliberate. Then there was Rex, a Rottweiler whose sheer bulk alone was enough to intimidate anyone foolish enough to approach. Bringing up the rear were twins Blaze and Ember, Australian cattle dogs whose boundless energy and sharp instincts made them perfect for patrolling the vast expanse of my property. Together they formed an impenetrable wall of fur, muscle, and teeth, ready to defend their territory, and me at a moment's notice. Training these dogs had been a labor of love, a project that consumed years of my life. From the moment they were puppies, I instilled in them a deep sense of duty and discipline. They learned to respond to commands with precision, whether it was circling the perimeter at dawn or standing sentinel outside my cabin during the night. Their training extended beyond mere obedience. They understood the importance of protecting the land as fiercely as I did. Over time, they became attuned to the rhythms of the forest, the rustle of leaves signaling deer nearby, the distant call of an owl marking the shift from dusk to darkness. Most importantly, they recognized the difference between friend and foe, a skill honed through countless drills designed to mimic real-world scenarios. But what truly set my dogs apart was their bond with one another. They operated as a cohesive unit, communicating silently through subtle gestures and shared intuition. When one dog detected movement along the fence line, the others would instinctively fan out, forming a perimeter before I even realized something was amiss. It was this unity that made them such formidable guardians. Strangers rarely ventured onto my property without being met by a chorus of growls and barks, a warning that brooked no argument. Those who ignored the initial deterrent quickly discovered that my dogs were not merely a deterrent, they were enforcers. Karen, oblivious to the reality awaiting her unsuspecting guests, had unknowingly invited 100 people into a situation they wouldn't soon forget. Though she may have envisioned a peaceful weekend camping trip, I knew better. My dogs weren't just animals. They were extensions of my will, protectors of my sanctuary. And when the first camper set foot on my land, they would learn exactly what it meant to trespass. Karen's vision. A community event gone awry. Karen's motivations for organizing the camping event were as predictable as they were infuriating. In her mind, the gathering was less about fostering genuine community spirit and more about cementing her status as the undisputed leader of the HOA. For years, she had dominated neighborhood meetings with her relentless campaigns for improvements that often seemed tailored to inflate her ego rather than address actual needs. Whether it was lobbying for decorative lampposts no one wanted or pushing for noise ordinances that stifled backyard barbecues, Karen thrived on control. This camping excursion was simply another chapter in her ongoing quest for dominance, a way to prove she could orchestrate large-scale events while simultaneously reminding everyone who held the reins in our community. From the outset, Karen treated the event as though it were her personal project, sparing no expense or effort to ensure it reflected her vision of perfection. Flyers boasting idyllic scenes of s'mores by the fire and stargazing under clear skies were distributed throughout the neighborhood weeks in advance. She even went so far as to create a detailed itinerary, complete with scheduled activities like guided nature hikes, storytelling sessions, and an absurdly ambitious scavenger hunt that spanned miles of terrain. Her enthusiasm bordered on obsessive, with updates flooding email chains and social media groups daily. Yet amid all this planning, one glaring omission stood out: my consent. To Karen, my land was little more than a picturesque backdrop for her grand design. She dismissed any consideration of how her plans might disrupt my life, viewing the property as a communal asset rather than a private haven. When questioned during an HOA meeting about whether she had secured permission, she waved off concerns with breezy confidence. "It's for the good of the community," she declared, as if those words absolved her of accountability. She assumed I would either comply quietly or be too intimidated to object, a miscalculation that spoke volumes about her inflated sense of authority. Her arrogance didn't stop there. Karen meticulously curated every aspect of the event, down to assigning specific camping zones based on family sizes and dietary preferences. She envisioned herself presiding over the festivities like a benevolent queen, basking in admiration as families bonded over marshmallows and laughter echoed through the trees. What she failed to anticipate, however, was the disconnect between her polished vision and the harsh realities of wilderness living. Not everyone shared her romanticized view of camping. Some attendees grumbled privately about leaving behind modern comforts, while others expressed skepticism about Karen's ability to manage such a large group effectively. Still, few dared challenge her directly, fearing her wrath or the inevitable gossip that followed dissenters. As the date approached, Karen doubled down on her preparations, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. She hired local vendors to supply food and equipment, arranged transportation for those unable to drive themselves, and even commissioned a photographer to document the event for posterity. Each decision reinforced her belief that this would be a resounding success, further blinding her to the potential consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines, seething at her audacity but quietly confident that her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. Unbeknownst to Karen, her meticulously planned weekend getaway was destined to become anything but serene. Beneath the veneer of camaraderie and forced cheer lay a ticking time bomb, one fueled by unchecked ambition, misplaced priorities, and a profound lack of respect for boundaries. And when the first unsuspecting camper arrived, they would find themselves face to face with guardians far more formidable than Karen could have ever imagined. Their rival. The morning of the camping event dawned crisp and clear, the kind of day that usually filled me with a sense of calm. But today, the stillness of the air felt heavy, charged with anticipation. I stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, as Karen's convoy rolled in. A parade of cars, SUVs, and even a rented shuttle bus packed with eager campers. Children pressed their faces against the windows. Adults juggled coolers and sleeping bags, and the occasional bark of excitement from a family pet added to the cacophony. The scene was chaotic yet strangely festive, like a carnival setting up shop in the middle of nowhere. Karen emerged from her glossy sedan wearing a khaki safari hat adorned with a feather, clearly intending to embody the role of intrepid expedition leader. Clutching her clipboard, she strode toward me with a wide smile plastered across her face, as though she expected me to join in her celebration. "Isn't this wonderful?" she gushed, gesturing dramatically at the procession behind her. "Everyone's so excited. We're going to have such a fantastic weekend." I didn't bother hiding my disdain. "You do realize this is private property, right? Or did you conveniently forget that part when you sent out your invitations?" Her grin faltered for a split second before snapping back into place. "Oh, don't be silly. It's all for the community. Besides, I'm sure you'll enjoy having everyone here. It'll be fun." "Fun," I repeated flatly, raising an eyebrow. Before I could elaborate on just how wrong she was, a loud commotion erupted near the entrance to my property. A group of teenagers had begun unloading oversized tents and portable speakers, laughing loudly as they debated which spot to claim first. One boy lugged a cooler labeled beer, while another hoisted a neon volleyball net over his shoulder. Clearly, Karen's carefully curated, family-friendly itinerary wasn't resonating with everyone. Karen clapped her hands together sharply, trying to regain control. "All right, everyone, let's get organized. Follow the map I've provided. You'll see designated areas for tents, parking, and activities." She turned back to me, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Don't worry, we've got everything under control. You won't even know we're here." That statement struck me as both laughable and infuriating. Did she honestly think 100 people could descend upon my land without leaving a trace? Already, I noticed tire tracks marring the dirt road leading to the main field, and someone had carelessly tossed a candy wrapper near the gate. This was only the beginning. As the crowd dispersed, setting up campsites and exploring the surroundings, I retreated to the safety of my cabin. From the window, I observed the growing chaos unfold. Families staked out prime real estate near the creek, stringing up hammocks between trees and scattering picnic blankets across the grass. Others wandered aimlessly, clearly unsure what to do next. Meanwhile, Karen flitted from group to group, dispensing instructions and posing for photos like some sort of celebrity host. But then, something shifted. The first sign of trouble came when a man attempting to pitch a tent accidentally knocked over one of my bird feeders. Startled chirps erupted from nearby bushes as sparrows scattered in every direction. Moments later, a child chasing after a soccer ball tripped over exposed roots and landed hard on the ground, prompting panicked shouts from his parents. These small incidents rippled outward, creating a ripple effect of tension. By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere had soured considerably. Complaints began circulating among the campers. Some griped about the uneven terrain making it impossible to properly secure their tents. Others lamented the lack of shade in certain areas, complaining about the relentless sun beating down on them. A few enterprising souls tried to light fires prematurely, only to discover that the damp would refuse to catch flame. Tempers flared as frustrations mounted, and Karen found herself besieged by demands for solutions she hadn't anticipated. Standing on my porch, I watched as the initial excitement gave way to irritation. The once idyllic vision of harmony Karen had promised was crumbling before her very eyes. But the worst was yet to come. As evening approached, shadows lengthened across the landscape, and the temperature dropped sharply. Campers huddled around half-hearted attempts at fires, shivering in clothes ill-suited for the chill. The cheerful chatter that had characterized the morning faded into muttered complaints and awkward silences. And somewhere in the distance, unseen but unmistakably present, my dogs began to stir. They started slowly, their movements deliberate and synchronized. Titan led the charge, his muscular frame cutting through the underbrush with silent efficiency. Luna followed close behind, her nose twitching as she caught the unfamiliar scents wafting through the air. Shadow, Rex, Blaze, and Ember fanned out in a practiced formation, their ears pricked forward, alert to every sound. They knew the drill. They had done this countless times before. At first, the campers barely noticed them. A low growl here, the snap of twigs there, nothing more than background noise in the vast expanse of wilderness. But as the dogs drew closer, their presence became impossible to ignore. Titan stepped into a clearing where a cluster of tents had been hastily erected, his amber eyes locking onto the startled faces of the occupants. Behind him, Luna let out a sharp bark that echoed through the trees, causing heads to whip around in alarm. Panic spread quickly. Parents scooped up children, clutching them tightly as they backed away from the advancing pack. Teenagers abandoned their cool demeanor, scrambling to gather belongings and retreat to safer ground. Even the most seasoned outdoorsmen froze, uncertain whether to stand their ground or flee. Karen, who had been busy placating a disgruntled couple over dinner arrangements, looked up just in time to see Titan standing tall and immovable mere feet away from her prized safari hat. For a moment everything stopped. The world narrowed to the standoff between humans and animals, a primal confrontation that stripped away pretense and left raw fear in its wake. And as the dogs circled the perimeter, their message was clear. This was my land, and they were its guardians. Karen's meticulously planned event had spiraled out of control, but the true reckoning was only beginning. Chaos unleashed. The arrival of my guard dogs transformed the camping event from a mildly irritating intrusion into an outright disaster. The initial shock rippled through the crowd like wildfire, spreading panic faster than any words could convey. Campers who had moments earlier been bickering over tent stakes and firewood now found themselves united by a single, overwhelming instinct: survival. The sight of 6 powerful canines moving with purposeful coordination struck terror into even the most composed individuals. Children clung to their parents' legs, whimpering softly, while adults exchanged frantic whispers about what to do next. Titan took center stage, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the makeshift campground. He didn't need to bark or snarl. His mere presence was enough to send shivers down spines. Slowly, deliberately, he stalked toward the heart of the encampment, stopping only when he reached the largest cluster of tents. His amber eyes scanned the faces of the terrified campers, daring anyone to challenge him. Behind him, Luna prowled along the edges of the clearing, her lithe form weaving between trees and brush as she marked her territory. Shadow and Rex flanked opposite sides of the group, their hackles raised and teeth bared in silent warning. Blaze and Ember darted ahead, sniffing at discarded belongings and nudging stray items with their noses, ensuring no corner remained unchecked. Karen, predictably, was the first to react, or rather, overreact. Spotting Titan standing sentinel near her command post, she let out a shrill scream that pierced the evening air. "Get those animals away from us!" she shrieked, waving her clipboard frantically as if it were some sort of magical talisman capable of warding off danger. Her bravado dissolved instantly, replaced by sheer hysteria. "This is unacceptable. Who lets loose wild dogs on innocent people?" "Innocent," I muttered under my breath, leaning casually against the railing of my porch where I had positioned myself to observe the unfolding drama. To me, the term seemed laughably misapplied given the circumstances. These innocent people were trespassing on my land without permission, disrupting the delicate balance I had spent years cultivating. If anything, the dogs were doing exactly what they were trained to do: protect their home and their master. But Karen wasn't listening to reason. Or perhaps she simply couldn't hear it over the din of escalating chaos. As the dogs continued their patrol, tensions boiled over. A burly man wielding a flashlight attempted to confront Titan, shouting threats and brandishing the beam like a weapon. It was a futile gesture. Titan didn't flinch, his gaze unwavering as he stared down the would-be hero. The man hesitated, visibly unnerved by the dog's steely resolve, before retreating sheepishly to the safety of his tent. Elsewhere, confusion reigned supreme. Groups of campers scrambled to dismantle their shelters, abandoning gear and supplies in their haste to flee. Tents collapsed under hasty hands, poles snapped, and sleeping bags were left strewn across the ground. Someone accidentally kicked over a lantern, sending shards of glass scattering across the dirt. Panic-stricken voices overlapped in a cacophony of fear and frustration. "What are we supposed to do?" cried a woman clutching two young children to her chest. "We can't stay here." "Call animal control," shouted another man, fumbling with his phone as he tried to dial emergency services. "They're not strays, they belong to him," someone else yelled, pointing accusingly in my direction. Through it all, Karen remained the epicenter of the turmoil. Abandoning her clipboard altogether, she staggered around the clearing, alternately pleading with the dogs to leave and demanding that I intervene. "Do something," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "You can't let them attack us." I crossed my arms and leaned back against the railing, allowing myself a rare smirk. "Technically, they're not attacking anyone," I replied calmly, raising my voice just enough to carry over the commotion. "They're just enforcing boundaries. Something you should have thought about before inviting 100 people onto private property." Karen froze mid-step, her mouth agape as she processed my words. For a fleeting moment, shame flickered across her features, though it was quickly overshadowed by indignation. "How dare you sit there smugly while your beasts terrorize innocent families?" she spat, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Innocent," I repeated mockingly, arching an eyebrow. Funny how quickly that word loses meaning when it suits you. Before she could respond, another wave of panic surged through the crowd. Blaze and Ember had discovered a stash of food left unattended near the communal dining area. Bags of chips, granola bars, and packaged snacks lay scattered across the ground, torn open and partially devoured. The sight sparked outrage among the campers, many of whom accused the dogs of ruining their provisions. "They're eating our food," shouted a teenager, pointing accusingly at the pair of energetic cattle dogs. "They're opportunists," I corrected dryly. "If you leave food lying around in the woods, you shouldn't be surprised when wildlife takes advantage of it." "This isn't wildlife, it's vandalism," Karen shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "You're responsible for this mess." "Am I?" I countered smoothly, tilting my head as if genuinely considering her accusation. "Or are you responsible for bringing 100 unprepared people onto land they had no business being on in the first place?" The argument went nowhere, drowned out by the escalating pandemonium. By now, the majority of campers had given up on salvaging their weekend. Cars roared to life as families piled inside, desperate to escape the perceived threat posed by my dogs. Tires spun in the dirt, kicking up clouds of dust as vehicles jockeyed for position on the narrow access road. Those without immediate transportation milled about anxiously, debating whether to wait for rides or brave the trek back on foot. Amid the chaos, Karen's authority crumbled entirely. No longer the confident organizer, she was reduced to a sobbing wreck, clinging to her car door as if it were her last lifeline. "This is your fault," she screamed at me one final time before climbing inside and slamming the door shut. Her engine roared to life, and she sped off in a cloud of exhaust fumes, leaving behind a trail of discarded flyers and forgotten dreams of community bonding. As the last vehicle disappeared down the driveway, silence settled over the property once more. The dogs returned to my side, tails wagging proudly as they basked in the aftermath of their work. Broken tents, spilled coolers, and abandoned gear littered the landscape, a testament to the havoc wrought by their mere presence. I surveyed the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and grim amusement. Karen had underestimated me and my dogs at her peril. Her grand vision of unity and connection had imploded spectacularly, leaving behind only discord and disorder. And though the victory was hollow, it served as a stark reminder. My land was not to be trifled with. Aftermath and reflection. As the dust settled, both literal and metaphorical, I found myself standing amidst the wreckage of Karen's ill-conceived camping extravaganza. The once pristine fields were now marred by flattened grass, scattered trash, and the remnants of hastily abandoned campsites. Empty soda cans glinted in the fading sunlight, tangled sleeping bags lay strewn across the ground, and a toppled bird feeder hung precariously from a branch, its contents spilled onto the dirt below. It was a mess, yes, but one that paled in comparison to the emotional toll inflicted on those who had dared to invade my sanctuary. The departure of the campers had been swift and chaotic, a mass exodus fueled by fear and frustration. Families fled in droves, their faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief. Parents bundled crying children into cars, muttering curses under their breath as they struggled to load gear into overstuffed trunks. Teenagers slouched sullenly in back seats, headphones clamped firmly over their ears to block out the sounds of recrimination echoing from the front. Even the most stoic adults couldn't hide their relief as they peeled away from my property, tires kicking up gravel in their haste to leave. Karen, unsurprisingly, had been the first to abandon ship. Her dramatic exit, a blur of screeching tires and flying debris, had been almost comical in its desperation. Watching her flee, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of vindication. For years, she had lorded over the neighborhood with an iron fist, dismissing dissent and disregarding boundaries. Now, she had finally experienced the consequences of her actions firsthand. The image of her tear-streaked face as she hurled accusations at me lingered in my mind, a satisfying reminder that even the most self-assured bullies could be brought low. Yet, as satisfying as the outcome was, it came with its own share of complications. While the campers had left behind physical evidence of their presence, they had also left behind lingering resentment. Word of the incident spread quickly through the community, fueled by exaggerated accounts posted online and whispered conversations at grocery stores. Some sympathized with my plight, acknowledging that Karen's actions had been reckless and entitled. Others, however, viewed me as the villain, a reclusive misanthrope who had deliberately sabotaged an innocent event for selfish reasons. "You could have handled it differently," remarked one neighbor during a chance encounter at the local coffee shop. His tone was measured, but his disapproval was evident. "Scaring people off with a pack of dogs. That's extreme, even for you." "It wasn't about scaring them," I replied curtly, gripping my cup tighter. "It was about protecting what's mine. Ask yourself, would you tolerate 100 strangers camping on your lawn without permission?" He didn't answer, instead averting his gaze and muttering something about needing to get back to work. I sighed inwardly, knowing that no amount of explanation would sway those determined to see me as the antagonist. Despite the criticism, there was a silver lining to the ordeal. The invasion and subsequent retreat of Karen's army had inadvertently strengthened my resolve. Cleaning up the aftermath gave me a renewed appreciation for the land I had fought so hard to preserve. Each piece of trash I picked up, each broken twig I cleared away, reminded me why I valued this place so deeply. It wasn't just acreage or scenery. It was a living, breathing entity that deserved respect and care. My dogs, too, seemed energized by the experience. They bounded through the fields with renewed vigor, their instincts sharpened by the thrill of defending their territory. Titan trotted proudly beside me as I inspected the damage, occasionally pausing to nuzzle my hand in search of praise. Luna kept watch from a nearby ridge, her keen eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of lingering intruders. Shadow and Rex lounged contentedly in the shade, while Blaze and Ember chased each other through the underbrush, their playful antics a welcome contrast to the tension of the previous day. In the days that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm. Birds resumed their morning symphonies, deer ventured cautiously back into the meadows, and the gentle babble of the creek provided a soothing backdrop to my daily routine. The scars left by the camping fiasco would heal in time, erased by nature's resilience and my determination to restore balance. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Karen's brazen disregard for my boundaries had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my relationship with the community. Was I truly as isolated as they believed? Had my efforts to protect my land alienated me from those around me? These questions gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, refusing to be ignored. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I made a decision. Retreating entirely from the world wasn't the solution. If I wanted to safeguard my sanctuary, I needed to engage, not retreat. Perhaps it was time to extend an olive branch, to show my neighbors that I wasn't the ogre they imagined but a person with valid concerns and a deep love for the land. With that thought in mind, I drafted a letter to the HOA board, outlining my stance on future events involving my property. I emphasized the importance of communication, mutual respect, and collaboration, suggesting ways we could coexist harmoniously without infringing on one another's rights. It wasn't an apology, for I felt none, but rather an invitation to start anew. As I sealed the envelope and placed it in the mailbox, I allowed myself a small smile. The battle with Karen had been a turning point, not just for me but for the fragile dynamic between privacy and community. Moving forward, I resolved to strike a balance, ensuring that my sanctuary remained untouched while fostering understanding among those who shared the same zip code. After all, protecting what matters most doesn't mean shutting everyone out. It means finding common ground, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The ripple effect. The fallout from Karen's disastrous camping event rippled far beyond the confines of my property, leaving an indelible mark on the community's dynamics. In the days that followed, the HOA meetings became battlegrounds of simmering resentment and thinly veiled accusations. Neighbors divided themselves into factions, those who sided with Karen, believing I had overreacted, and those who secretly admired my defiance against her domineering tactics. The once cordial atmosphere of these gatherings devolved into tense exchanges, with tempers flaring over issues both trivial and significant. Karen, predictably, seized every opportunity to paint herself as the victim. During one particularly heated session, she stood at the podium, her voice trembling with manufactured indignation as she recounted the terrifying ordeal my dogs had subjected her guests to. "It wasn't just about protecting his land," she declared, jabbing a finger in my direction. "It was intimidation, plain and simple. He used his animals as weapons to drive us off." Her theatrics earned murmurs of agreement from some attendees, but others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unwilling to fully endorse her narrative. I let her rant, choosing instead to remain seated and impassive, my expression unreadable. When my turn came to speak, I rose calmly and addressed the room with measured clarity. "What happened wasn't about intimidation," I began, meeting each pair of eyes steadily. "It was about enforcing boundaries. Private property is not a public playground, no matter how noble the intentions behind using it might seem. If Karen had bothered to ask for permission, or even acknowledge that this land belongs to someone, none of this would have occurred." My words hung in the air, punctuated by a heavy silence. While some nodded in reluctant agreement, others bristled at my directness. Karen, red-faced and seething, shot back with a barrage of counterarguments, but her credibility had already begun to erode. Rumors of her high-handedness and disregard for consent had circulated widely, painting her as less of a benevolent leader and more of a tyrant bent on imposing her will. The schism within the HOA grew deeper with each passing week. Long-time friendships fractured under the weight of conflicting loyalties, and casual acquaintances morphed into bitter rivals. Social media amplified the discord, with anonymous posts dissecting every detail of the camping debacle. Memes mocking Karen's safari hat and exaggerated cries of distress flooded local forums, while others defended her right to organize community events. Amid the chaos, My name became synonymous with resistance, a symbol of standing firm against unchecked authority. But the divisions weren't confined to digital spaces or sterile conference rooms. On the streets, interactions grew strained. A neighbor who had previously greeted me warmly now avoided eye contact, muttering vague pleasantries as she hurried past. Another openly confronted me outside the hardware store, accusing me of ruining what could have been a memorable weekend for dozens of families. Yet there were also unexpected allies, people who approached me discreetly to express quiet admiration for holding my ground. "Good for you," one elderly man whispered conspiratorially as we passed in the produce aisle. Someone had to put her in her place. The most surprising development, however, came from within the HOA itself. Emboldened by the backlash against Karen, a small coalition of members began advocating for greater transparency and inclusivity in decision-making processes. They pushed for reforms that prioritized homeowner autonomy and discouraged unilateral actions like the unauthorized use of private property. Though their efforts faced fierce opposition from Karen's loyalists, the momentum for change was undeniable. Meanwhile, Karen's influence waned steadily. Her attempts to rally support for new initiatives fell flat, met with apathy or outright hostility. Attendance at HOA meetings dwindled, and her emails went largely unanswered. It was clear that her reign as the self-appointed arbiter of neighborhood affairs was nearing its end. For me, navigating this shifting landscape required a delicate balancing act. On one hand, I relished the decline of Karen's power. It was a long overdue reckoning for years of micromanagement and entitlement. On the other, I recognized the dangers of allowing division to fester unchecked. Communities thrive on cooperation, not conflict, and I couldn't afford to isolate myself entirely. Determined to mend fences without compromising my principles, I took steps to rebuild bridges. I attended a neighborhood potluck, contributing a homemade casserole and engaging in polite conversation with former detractors. I offered assistance to a struggling family whose fence had collapsed during a storm, earning their gratitude and softening their stance toward me. Most importantly, I maintained open lines of communication with the emerging reformist faction within the HOA, lending my support to policies that promoted fairness and accountability. These gestures, though small, yielded tangible results. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere began to shift. Conversations became less confrontational, and tentative alliances formed across ideological lines. Even Karen, sensing the tide turning against her, adopted a more conciliatory tone in public forums, though her private resentment remained palpable. Looking back, I realized that the camping incident had served as a catalyst for broader change. It exposed fault lines within the community that had long been papered over by superficial civility. More significantly, it underscored the importance of respecting individual autonomy while fostering collective well-being, a lesson that resonated deeply with those willing to listen. As the seasons changed and the wounds of the past healed, I found solace in the knowledge that my actions, however controversial, had sparked meaningful dialogue. The scars of the conflict would fade with time, but the lessons learned would endure, shaping the community into something stronger, fairer, and more resilient. And through it all, my dogs remained steadfast companions, their loyalty unwavering as they continued to patrol the boundaries of my sanctuary. A constant reminder that sometimes, protecting what you love requires courage, conviction, and an unyielding commitment to principle. Lessons in balance. Reflecting on the events surrounding Karen's misguided camping endeavor, I'm struck by the complexity of human relationships and the delicate equilibrium required to navigate them. This experience has taught me invaluable lessons about asserting boundaries, fostering understanding, and finding harmony between personal convictions and communal expectations. At its core, the ordeal underscored the importance of respecting autonomy while recognizing the interconnectedness of our lives within a shared environment. One of the clearest takeaways is the necessity of clear communication. Karen's failure to consult me before commandeering my property highlights a fundamental flaw in her approach, assuming goodwill without seeking consent. Her actions were rooted in hubris, driven by a belief that her vision for the community superseded individual rights. In contrast, My decision to draft a letter to the HOA board following the incident demonstrated the value of proactive dialogue. By articulating my perspective and proposing constructive solutions, I opened the door to reconciliation and collaboration. This underscores a universal truth. Conflicts are often born from misunderstandings, and addressing them requires transparency and empathy. Equally important is the concept of reciprocity. Just as I expect others to honor my boundaries, I must be willing to extend the same courtesy. This realization prompted me to engage more actively with my neighbors, attending gatherings and offering assistance where possible. These small acts of goodwill helped dispel misconceptions and fostered a sense of mutual respect. While I remain committed to preserving my sanctuary, I now recognize that isolation serves no one. It breeds resentment and widens divides. Instead, building bridges creates opportunities for growth and understanding, enriching both personal and communal experiences. The incident also reinforced the significance of standing firm in one's principles. Allowing Karen's encroachment to go unchallenged would have set a dangerous precedent, undermining my authority over my own land and emboldening similar transgressions in the future. By taking decisive action, even if it meant facing criticism, I affirmed the importance of protecting what I hold dear. However, this resolve must be tempered with discernment. Vigilance should never morph into aggression, nor should defense devolve into hostility. My dogs exemplified this balance perfectly. Their mere presence sufficed to deter intrusions without resorting to violence. Similarly, in human interactions, assertiveness need not equate to antagonism. Perhaps the most profound insight gleaned from this saga is the duality of strength and vulnerability. Protecting my sanctuary required fortitude, but healing the rifts it created demanded humility. Acknowledging the impact of my actions on others, whether intentional or incidental, was a humbling yet essential step toward resolution. It reminded me that leadership isn't about domination. It's about stewardship. Whether managing a parcel of land or navigating interpersonal dynamics, true strength lies in the ability to adapt, empathize, and inspire positive change. Ultimately, this episode has reshaped my perspective on community engagement. Rather than viewing it as a threat to my independence, I now see it as an extension of my values. Building a supportive network doesn't mean sacrificing sovereignty. Rather, it enhances it by creating a foundation of trust and cooperation. Communities thrive when individuals contribute their unique strengths while respecting one another's limitations. By embracing this philosophy, I've discovered a newfound sense of purpose, one that aligns with my commitment to protecting my sanctuary while nurturing the bonds that sustain us all. Moving forward, I carry these lessons with me, mindful of the intricate dance between autonomy and connection. The path ahead may still hold challenges, but armed with clarity and compassion, I am confident in my ability to navigate them. After all, the essence of a sanctuary lies not only in its physical boundaries but in the relationships that define and defend it. Explain.